tonight.
Okie dokie. Welcome everybody, it's Sainted, and I just want to go over a couple of drops that were mentioned to me that I didn't get to because I was under the weather, so to speak, this past week. So I wanted to address the Canadian scandal of Canada's SNC-Lavalin scandal. And I'm not going to talk a lot because it heats me up talking about this particular family of criminals and international globalist thugs. It goes back a very long way, so I'm just going to get into it and cut right now.
Scandal surrounds a Canadian company, which is one of the world's largest engineering and construction firms. In 2015, it was charged with bribery and fraud over the payment of nearly $100 million in kickbacks to Libyan officials. The dealings allegedly involved family members of former leader Muammar Gaddafi. They were meant to secure contracts in a lucrative irrigation project. Now, Justin Trudeau's denied any inappropriate behaviour, insisting he was just trying to save jobs.
I and my staff always acted appropriately and professionally. We, of course, had discussions about the potential loss of 9,000 jobs in communities across the country, including the possible impact on pensions.
Former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould resigned over the affair, citing the veiled threats allegedly levelled at her by the Canadian Prime Minister's office. Trudeau's principal secretary also called it quits amid reports that more officials are ready to leave the administration. Political analyst Alessandro Bruno explains why the case could indeed cost the Prime Minister his seat too.
It shows that politics and interests do mix in Canada as well as other places. And this is the problem. It's the image that the Prime Minister has built around himself, or some people call it the brand of a feminist, ultra-liberal, ultra-legal, transparent leader who is completely tripping over his own ideals. In 9 or 10 months, there will be an election in Canada. So no matter where this goes, constitutional crisis, political crisis, there will be a problem in the election, and Justin Trudeau's leadership is definitely in question now. The idea was that if SNC-Lavalin would face prosecution in Canada, it might have to move headquarters away from Canada. So, and also the SNC-Lavalin is in a riding where Trudeau is directly involved. The more ridings you win, the more chances you have of winning an election. It must have been very important for Trudeau to have taken such really amateur measures. I mean, he thought he could pressure his justice minister.
Moving on. Here he's caught in that. There's this other video. This is news. So listen to what Box said and then moved into.
It will allow the U.S. extradition case against a high-ranking Chinese telecom executive to proceed. Huawei Chief Financial Officer Meng Wanzhou is accused of conspiring to defraud banks by misrepresenting the company's relationship with a suspected Iranian front company. China says it is utterly dissatisfied with and firmly opposes the decision. Well, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is dealing with a growing scandal tonight. It involves what he allegedly told a top official to do about a major company involved in a corruption investigation. Correspondent Jillian Turner picks up the story from outside the Canadian Embassy in Washington.
I and my staff always acted appropriately and professionally.
That's Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, continuing to resist a groundswell of calls for his resignation. His office treading water as a scandal that erupted inside his cabinet now threatens to drown the entire administration.
Our government will always focus on jobs.
But Trudeau is holding fast to his main line of defense.
My job as Prime Minister has always been to stand up for Canadians.
Trudeau's own former Attorney General and Justice Minister claims his office launched a consistent and sustained campaign over many months to get her to drop charges against a Canadian company. SNC-Lavalin is one of the world's largest construction and engineering firms, and Jody Wilson-Raybould planned to slap its leadership with bribery and fraud charges. In testimony before the Canadian Parliament Wednesday, Wilson-Raybould outlined what she calls Trudeau's bold-faced intimidation tactics.
There were many other inappropriate
conversations and attempts at political interference that occurred. I believe where it got even more heightened were what I described as the veiled threats.
If true, it's a dramatic fall from grace for Trudeau, a young, energetic, liberal prime minister who grabbed the world's attention a decade ago thanks in large part to his easy rapport with world leaders, high-profile friendships with President Obama, and spats with President Trump over free trade. Now, Trudeau's awful week is poised to get worse as Canada's Conservative Party sharpens its knives.
It's a textbook case of government corruption, with those at the very top of the Prime Minister's office implicated.
Trudeau's office told Fox News just a short while ago, quote, "We completely disagree with the former Attorney General's characterization of the events. No matter how this shakes out, though, Canadians will get their say." Trudeau's up for re-election in October, and what polls show is going to be a very tight race, Shannon.
Moving on, let's go back to, this is such a great dialogue she has with the entire cabinet. Watch this.
Engineering, procurement, and construction services. It has a lot of employees in the Montreal area and has won a lot of major taxpayer funded, like big, multi-million-dollar contracts from the federal government. So there's a lot of votes at stake, and there's a lot of profit at stake here. So what's happened was in 2015, the RCMP laid charges against this company, and the charges were, they had alleged that the company offered bribes worth $47.7 million to Libyan officials, and Muammar Gaddafi's son was named in the court documents, I believe. The company is also alleged to have defrauded Libyan public agencies of approximately $129 million. And recently we found out that the RCMP has laid out a bribery scheme here in Canada with the company involving the $127 million Jacques Cartier bridge contract, of which a federal official pleaded guilty to last year in accepting more than $2.3 million worth of payments from this company. Like, what's the cost of doing business here? Like, the RCMP in 2015 used this quote. They said the charges, the corruption of foreign officials undermine good governance and sustainable economic development. This is a huge deal. Fast forward to this year. The company, this very wealthy, well-funded company, went on the lobbying spree to end all lobbying spree. Like, imagine American-style lobbyists, like full court press on the government, on everybody, meeting after meeting with the Prime Minister's office. Won't take no for an answer because they wanted to get out of this. That's the motivation here. And why? Because if they're convicted of this, this company can't bid on what? Federal contracts. That's the big penalty for this, right? There's a lot at stake. So in the budget bill, Mr. Speaker, this company, after lobbying, the Liberals snuck in something called a deferred prosecution agreement. In this like bajillion-page document that had everything under the sun, they snuck in a major legal change. And a deferred prosecution agreement, sort of simply put, would allow the government, or would allow SNC-Lavalin not to have, if they went this route, to potentially not have to go to jail or be convicted. They could just pay a fine. And then they would also be eligible to what? Bid on federal contracts. So this is all happening behind closed doors. This gets snuck into an omnibus budget bill. The bill passes, but we have something called the Public Prosecutor Office in Canada, which is arm's length, and they're the ones who make the call on whether or not they use this deferred prosecution agreement. The public prosecutor said, nope, we're not doing this, we're going to trial. Then the Attorney General, the former Attorney General, held firm on that decision and said, yep, we're going to trial. Then, according to the clerk of the Privy Council office in testimony last week, after the Prime Minister's story on this issue has changed a million times, said the following: we went to the former Attorney General, this is essentially what he said, and we laid out the economic implications of what would happen if this went to trial and there was a conviction. This happened after she had made her decision to proceed. What we are talking about here is the Prime Minister's office and the supposedly nonpartisan public service, the head of the public service, essentially being involved or standing accused of being involved in obstruction of justice at the highest levels. And that is why the Prime Minister needs to testify in front of Canadians. Let me lay out 5 reasons why this is so important. First of all, we need to find out, because what is accused here, and keep in mind, for those who are watching, the former Attorney General stood her ground after all of this, and then what? She was fired. Prime Minister fired her. Okay? So first of all, this is a potential obstruction of justice. This isn't just an ethics breach. This isn't just an Arakan Island slap on the wrist situation. There could be potentially serious criminality involved in this, number 1. Number 2, what message does this send? It sends a message to everybody in this country that there are 2 sets of rules, that there's 2 different justice systems in this country. In Canada, one for people who can afford millions of dollars of lobbyists and can put pressure based on ridings in Montreal, and one for racialized communities. Women who don't have that opportunity, who, you know, we can sit here and talk about all sorts of ways to deal with that issue, but I mean, that is the reality here. There are many people in Canada that do not get this opportunity. So that's a huge problem. The third thing is that the Prime Minister, oh, Mr. Feminist, oh, he's such a feminist, he's standing up for women. The clerk of the Privy Council stood in our Justice Committee last week and said, basically, well, I think she experienced things differently when she was trying to determine whether or not, or explain whether or not this was quote unquote inappropriate pressure that could be criminal. Where did we hear that before? Prime Minister had a groping allegation. He used the exact same words. She should have experienced it differently. Come on. This isn't he said, she said, as Maclean's magazine said. This is he said. He's a fake feminist. This Prime Minister is somebody who wraps feminism around him like a warm, fuzzy cloak to get votes. And then when the rubber hits the road, when lobbyists come upon him, she experienced it differently. She should have done something else. That is garbage and disgusting. And he needs to be held in front of that committee to be accountable for that. Because you don't get to stand up and say you're a feminist and then do that to a woman. You just don't. He's also kept her silent. He's kept her on a muzzle and a leash while he goes out and spins this story. And that's disgusting. That's wrong. He needs to be held to account for that. And finally, as a Calgary MP, deferred prosecution agreements, you're not supposed to consider economic arguments. And then the clerk of the Privy Council gets in front of the Justice Committee and goes, I told the former Attorney General it's about the economic argument. A lot of jobs were at stake. You know what? Maybe the company shouldn't have bribed Libyan officials to begin with. Shouldn't have bribed people for contracts. Maybe there should be a cost to doing that. Because you know what? The people in my riding, where's the economic considerations for all of the punitive policies they've put against Alberta energy companies? My riding is looking at this and going, why does Montreal get deferred prosecution agreements? And as we found out today, the government's considering changing the rules so even if they are convicted, that they can still bid on federal contracts. Why are those jobs better than my jobs? The role of a prime minister is to unite our country. All jobs are important. You should stand for justice. This is disgusting. This is what every single one of us in this place should be standing against, regardless of political stripe. And Mr. Speaker, to every person standing on that backbench, you are not here for yourself. They're not there for themselves. They're there to stand up for justice and their community. And their role is to hold the government to account, even if that government is of the same partisan stripe as they are. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where you stand for what's right, or you stand for nothing at all. The Prime Minister was wrong. They should be giving him no quarter, and he should be standing in front of that committee and have to answer for the fact that he's put words in a strong woman's mouth, that he said that one set of jobs is better than another job, that he stands accused of obstruction of justice. Everybody in this country, regardless of how we vote, stand for one thing, and that is the independence of our judiciary, the fact that our country can stand tall and proud and say, we don't do business the same way that other countries do. And that starts today with the leader of our country. He needs to be in front of this committee, and he needs to be held to account. Every person who votes against this is standing and giving him a shield for this type of abrogation of democracy. Every person who votes against this motion should be held to account by the people in their communities who don't want to be divided on this type of garbage. This is the stuff that divides our country. And when at the highest level of government, Mr. Speaker, the leader of our country stands up, fake feminist, standing for jobs with a company that's it's accused of bribing Libyans. Come on. We've got to get our act together, and it starts with the Prime Minister.
Nice, nice. Couldn't have set up it by myself. Ah, that was great. Okay, let's get into it.
It looks like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is corrupting Canada's legal system for the benefit of international criminals and for himself. It's way past time for him to resign, and he needs to be investigated by the RCMP, but I need your help to put the pressure on. Montreal-based company SNC-Lavalin is one of the world's largest engineering and construction companies, but it's also one of the world's most corrupt companies. I want to give you the Coles Notes version of what's happening. It's so much. There's so much to this story. Now, SNC does work all over the world, but here in Canada, the company faces fraud and corruption charges in relation to nearly $50 million in bribes it is alleged to have paid to Libyan officials in the 10 years between 2001 and 2011 when dictator Muammar Gaddafi was still alive and in power. The company's in trouble for paying off a brutal dictator to help their business interests. And in turn, that brutal dictator then used those millions to oppress and harm his own people. SNC was so cozy with the Gaddafi family that in 2014, during one of the several times SNC invited Gaddafi's kid to come live in Canada at their expense, the company was funding all the debauchery of old Muammar's progeny. Evidence in a civil court suit between an SNC executive and the company, evidence that was eventually handed over to the RCMP, revealed that SNC was using their petty cash to pay for hookers and strippers and porn for Saudi Gaddafi when he lived in Montreal and Toronto for 4 months back in 2014. So SNC is in a lot of hot water with the Canadian legal system. But they also have a lot of friends in the Liberal Party of Canada. They donate a lot of money to the Liberal Party of Canada, sometimes even illegally. One Liberal MP, Alexandra Mendez, is admittedly married to someone who works for SNC. And the company's Montreal-based, just like Justin Trudeau. It may as well be the SNC Liberal Party of Canada since the two are so closely intertwined. So when SNC got in trouble for all those Libyan bribes, SNC began a full court press on their friends, lobbying the Liberals hard at least 19 times since 2017 to enter into a remediation agreement with them, something you might hear now called a Deferred Prosecution Agreement, or a DPA. Instead of going to trial for all the crimes they committed in Libya, the company says that they've now changed their ways and they expect a clean slate for themselves under Canadian law. We just have to trust them. The deal the company was asking for and the deal powerful Liberals wanted for them was a fine and an apology. And that's pretty much it. And probably the most important part of the deal would allow SNC to continue to be eligible for lucrative government contracts despite bribing the Libyans. Those would be government contracts handed out by their friends in the Liberal Party. Our Justice Minister at the time, though, Jody Wilson-Raybould, was having none of it. Even though she's a Liberal, she wasn't willing to meddle in the Canadian justice system to give Liberal Party friends favorable treatment. And her party turned on her for it. But unlike other bullied silent Liberals, Wilson-Raybould spoke up and told the truth at the Justice Committee meeting this week. Jody Wilson-Raybould testified that Justin Trudeau and his staff, including his principal secretary and best friend Gerald Butts, as well as Katie Telford, Trudeau's chief of staff, spent months and months trying to convince her to defer prosecution of SNC, telling her that doing the right thing by Canadians and prosecuting this company for their crimes would harm too many Canadian jobs and jeopardize the Liberals' chances of hanging on to a few seats in Quebec.
Right after his election, Justin Trudeau flew down to New York to sit at Soros' knee. Look at that. Look at the body language there. The master, the father on the left, and the good boy on the right. Who you can see who's in charge in that photo, eh? We know about some of their meetings, because in this case, Trudeau tweeted the picture of it. We probably don't know about all of their meetings, though. I mean, remember when Justin Trudeau tried to keep his secret visits to a private island in the Bahamas, owned by another billionaire, the Aga Khan, tried to keep them secret. Trudeau took enormously expensive gifts from that billionaire, private flights, private island vacation, and he tried to keep it a secret from the public, even breaking the law to do so. He was convicted, Trudeau was, 4 times of breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, the first sitting prime minister to be convicted of that offense ever. Trudeau keeps many of his controversial meetings secret. Like when he met with that Taliban sympathizer, Joshua Boyle. We only learned about that because Boyle bragged about it with this Twitter tweet. And in that same tweet, look at that, Boyle says it wasn't their first meeting. I'm not surprised. Same thing with George Soros. Here's George Soros' son and his political heir, Alexander Soros, meeting with Ahmed Hassan. I don't know if we would have seen that photo unless Soros bragged about it. George Soros isn't like most political activists or mega donors. He's pretty much as big as every other political donor combined, and he knows it. And he himself says he has a God complex, and so he collects people like playthings, especially politicians. In fact, you could even say he collects countries. Here's Soros' own website. This is the Open Society Foundation's website. He boasts of spending $32 billion so far in political activism. I'm sure some of it has gone to genuine charity. How could it not? But most of it is, in Soros' own words, about changing the system. I think it's fair to say that George Soros hates the West. He hates Europe and European thinking. He hates Western civilization. Although he was born Jewish, he detests Israel. And he has said that he doesn't like Judaism, the religion. His father, too. They actually changed their family name from Schwartz to a made-up name, Soros. Soros himself has profited mightily off of capitalism and freedom, but he promotes globalism and socialism. I don't even really think you could call Soros a capitalist, even though he's a multi-billionaire. A capitalist is someone who builds things, you know, like an oil man or a real estate tycoon, someone who makes factories. Soros is just a speculator. He made a lot of his money betting against the British pound back in 1992. He crashed the market, devalued the currency, that threw millions of British people into poverty and unemployment. But hey, he made $1 billion in a day. Soros has a bizarre view of the world. He was a teenager in Hungary when the Nazis invaded, and he actually ran errands for the invading Nazis, not for the resistance. According to his authorized biography, he hand-delivered death summonses to the Jews in town for the Nazis, to tell those Jews to report to the trains where the Nazis would send them to their deaths. Now, he was a teenager back then, and his father told him to do it. His father actually handed Soros off to a Nazi enforcer who went around Hungary with George Soros. Soros was pretending to be a non-Jewish teenager. And that Nazi expropriated property from the Jews in Hungary. Now, you might not blame a teenager who was in a wartime, who was told by his father just to do that, do whatever it takes to survive. But what I find so telling about Soros' character, his morality, is not what he did as a teenager under duress, but his reflections on it decades later as a grown man, when he was asked about it on the show 60 Minutes. And he had no compunction about it. He actually once said that it was the most exciting time of his life. Here, take a look at this.
Was it difficult? Not at all. Not at all. Maybe as a child you don't see the connection, but it created no problem at all.
No feeling of guilt.
No. for example, that I'm Jewish, and here I am watching these people go, I could just as easily be there, I should be there, none of that.
Well, of course, I could be on the other side, or I could be the one from whom the thing is being taken away. But there was no sense that I shouldn't be there.
Yeah, so that's George Soros, a Nazi collaborator in his teens. Okay, maybe you could forgive that. But as a grown man, he was just fine with that, didn't lose a minute's sleep. He's a speculator who games the financial system to enrich himself by impoverishing others. He's not into building wealth. It's not a positive sum game with him. It's speculation. And now he's in the business of renting or buying politicians. So has he collected Justin Trudeau into his politician collection? Well, we asked. We sent a simple letter to the Immigration Department of Canada under the Access to Information Law. We sent them that Government of Canada press release, the one I read to you, that described the joint initiative. And we said, quote, regarding the agreement between the Government of Canada, the UNHCR, and the Open Society Foundation to launch a joint initiative aimed at increasing private sponsorship of refugees around the world, as announced at the below link, please provide copies of all background and supporting policy documents. Include copies of any agreements involved. Provide only final or latest versions of documents. And then we sent the link to the press release that I showed you earlier. And they wrote back and they said, following a thorough search of our information holdings, I regret to inform you that no records were found that respond to your request. And it was signed by Michelle Dunn, Assistant Director, Complex and Sensitive Issues Unit, Corporate Affairs, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. Really? Complex and sensitive issues, eh? Wow. Now, if you want to read that letter, we've posted the whole thing on our website. You can find the link below. Do you believe them? Do you believe there was not a single record, not a single piece of paper, not a single email, not a single memo, not a single scheduler in the calendar, that there was nothing, no records whatsoever of that meeting, other than the website and I guess the immigration minister going on TV about it? Nothing, really. The government can't do anything without a dozen bureaucrats being involved, without forms being filled out in quintuplicate. There was a meeting, there was a conference. There were memos, there were plans, of course there were, but they say there's not a single record? No one. Do you believe them? I don't believe them. We filed another similar request for any correspondence, any communications between the Canadian government and Soros's Open Society Foundations. They said the same thing. They said they have nothing. Sorry, no. Really? No emails, not even a letter. Nothing. They're lying. I mean, we know that Soros has no soul if he is untroubled about his role in sending his fellow Hungarian Jews to their deaths on behalf of the Nazis, as we saw in that 60 Minutes clip. He surely doesn't mind lying to reporters. And he has no duty to tell us anything. He's not the government. But what is the Canadian government's excuse? We're appealing this refusal, by the way. You can't even call it a refusal, since they're saying they don't even have any info. They're not saying we have it, but we refuse to give it to you. They're claiming there's no records at all. But we know they're liars. They lied about Justin Trudeau's vacation to Billionaire Island. They tried to keep it secret. He was convicted of that. 4 counts of breaching the law. They're lying here too. Justin Trudeau is a liar.
And on that note, let me just reaffirm a couple of different picks, and I'm going to leave it off on this video. Oh, this is great. Great stuff. Oh, boy. I'm not going to talk too much. I'm not going to talk. Justin Trudeau and his real dad. Communist leftist leader. I don't think you can deny it. Here's what Justin Trudeau thinks. God, it makes me sick. So, for the record, I do not support any Liberal in Canada or abroad. And I believe that most Liberals are globalist, communist scum. And I'm going to read you what Justin Trudeau said about white Canadians. Here we go. Old white stock Canadians. Wow, that's incredible. The very concept of a nation founded by European settlers is offensive to me. Old stock white Canadians are an unpleasant relic and quite frankly replaceable. And we will replace them. This is Sainted, and I'm out. To the globalists and to leftists and communism, I hope your failed ideology sinks to the bottom of the ocean.